I can't remember, am I supposed to ring this once or twice? So anyway, ding. I want to welcome everybody to the Amos Fortune Forum. This year, 2026, is our 80th year, which is pretty awesome, of programs that bring interesting people connected to Jaffrey and our Monadnock region and beyond. And before I give the formal introduction to our keynote, Duncan Watson here, I got a few short announcements to make. One, our website, amosfortune.org, if you're one of your first times being here. We have more about our speakers if you want to find out more. We have recordings of all of the speakers that have come before, so you can watch some very interesting people. We welcome your comments and suggestions, and there's a place where you can send us a postcard. Maybe you might want to suggest, hey, I got a good idea about a speaker people would like to hear. So go to the website and become a contributor. And we're always looking for people to become more involved with the forum. And if you want to become involved, Bruce is standing right back there, or sitting. You can talk to Bruce or me. I would like to thank Susan for organizing the dinner tonight for Duncan and his family. And of course, thanks to Bonnie of Calls, who put together this really, really cool flower arrangement. It was very on point for what our subject is today. And I want to thank Helen and Steve for hosting the reception that's coming on tonight. So right after the show, if those of you who've been here before, we invite you to a reception in the parish house. And that was put together today by Steve and Helen Fields. So thanks, and again, a thanks always to Betsy Trimble, who organizes all of that. So thank you, Betsy. And then last of all, a huge thanks to all of you who make the forum what it is. This is about sharing interesting things and meeting people, and it's been part of Jaffrey's history for 80 years. And it's because you all come why we can still do this. And so if you would like to help support the forum, you can write us a check, you can drop something in the begging bowl, or you can come talk to one of us. And if you do that, that's what helps keep the forum free and open, and has, since 1946. Okay, so now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. I'll say a few words about Duncan Watson. He is a champion of recycling. He is the author of this really lovely book, which I encourage you all to read. It's really it's titled One Man's Trash, One Man Against 1.6 billion pounds, but it's really about people. And so Duncan was the Assistant Director for Public Works in Keene for more than 30 years, where he created and led the facility recognized as the best municipal recycling facility in the state of New Hampshire. Along the way, he's received numerous awards, including being inducted into the Recycling Hall of Fame in 2011. There is such a thing. He's a true believer in finding solutions to difficult problems. And the problem he's going to talk about tonight is one we all see, and it's a tough problem, and he has a solution. And he's done some interesting things in his life, and you may be surprised, but you've probably heard his voice before. But that is part of the story I'm going to let Duncan tell. So, Duncan, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm really thrilled to be here. This is sort of like, in my mind, my TED Talk, which I'm really excited about because I've been preparing for this for many, many years. But anyway, as Tom mentioned, and thank you to the Amos Fortune Forum to have me here tonight. I'm really pleased to be here, and I'm pleased to make this presentation tonight. As mentioned, my name is Duncan Watson, but my full name is actually Duncan Pepper Watson, so my initials DPW. I always wondered when I was a little kid why my initials were on every utility cover around town, and now I know. But anyway, I just actually retired from Keene Public Works back in December after 33 and a half years. And as probably a number of you in the audience know, retirement is awesome. I'm having a really good time, but I will tell you a little bit about what my next steps are in my life, but first we got to get to what we're going to get to here tonight. So the book, Everyone's Trash, One Man Against 1.6 billion pounds. By show of hands here tonight, how many people have thrown something away today? Yep, every one of us, to the tune of about 5 to 8 pounds per day per person. So that adds up to a cumulative 1.6 billion pounds that are generated in the United States every single day. And in my mind, every one of those 1.6 billion pounds has a story associated with it. And that's what the book was about for me. So the presentation tonight is going to be a little bit different. You know, it's going to be a little bit more formal. It's going to be about where we've been, where we are, where we're going with regard to waste management or trash. But the book itself really is about people and their connection to trash, and really tries to lean on more or the humorous side of things. If you are familiar with the writing of Bill Bryson, he's like my guru in terms of, you know, how I like my writing style to be. And so the stories are sort of much more humorous, but it does address some of the topics that I'm going to be talking about tonight. So we will get going. And I use these presentation boards because I'm not a Luddite specifically. But I've had enough. I've been doing presentations around the state. I've been to about 40 or 45 libraries in the course of this book tour that I've been on. And I've had some issues where I've been plugging in my USB slide presentation, and then all of a sudden it glitches, and I'm like, So I went with a low-tech solution, even though you'll see as my presentation goes on that that technology is going to play a big role in the future of waste management, and we'll get going with that. One of the things that's unique about the book is that it tries to tell a story. So the cover itself tells a little bit of a story where my character, Recycling Sam, is holding up a trash can in the earth, sort of framing the problem. And then I hired an artist named John Klostner, who's a cartoonist for the New Yorker out of Elliott, Maine, and he did a unique drawing on every chapter heading of Recycling Sam, going through basically a bowling motion. So he's like, you know, preparing to bowl, and each chapter has a unique drawing. And on the very back is Recycling Sam has bowled the earth. The trash cans are knocked down, implying that maybe we won something this time, but we shall see. So part of the genesis of the book itself was that, you know, we've been brought up with popular culture figures that are associated with trash, and so, you know, it's become part of our lives. Of course, we've got Pigpen out there, who, you know, is always walking around in a cloud of dust. Maybe you've seen the movie WALL-E, where they animated the robots. Fantastic movie, but how they managed to convey human emotion in an animation like that is pretty staggering. Certainly, those that I can look around here will absolutely recognize Sanford and Son. It's the big one. And we've got, and then Oscar the Grouch, who literally lives in a trash can. So these were the inspiration to create this character of Recycling Sam. And Recycling Sam's motto is everyone makes a difference. And so as I talk to you tonight, I want you to try to expand your mind just a little bit, because yes, individual actions do make a big difference. But when you're thinking about this problem and how you frame this problem, it's the scale that is hard to grasp here. So when you go to your little recycling center in town, like I live in Walpole, 3,600 people, you know, it's kind of manageable. You can sort of see how the ebb and flow of it. But when you start getting into more urban areas where most people live, the trash problem just multiplies, you know, exponentially. And so this is really what I'm after for a solution to the problem, is how to deal with this exponential issue that we're talking about, not what's specifically happening in small towns, even though we've hit a wall. And so breaking through this wall that we've been on for a while here is sort of my mission and why I'm doing these presentations. I think it helps to talk a little bit about the economics of the situation to start. So in the state of New Hampshire, we have 5 operating landfills and some over 200 online landfills. Almost every community in New Hampshire has an online landfill that has long been closed. But in Keene specific, we have a unique program where our recycling program, our solid waste program, is completely outside of the tax rate. Now, for those of you who might be living in Keene, you're well aware that the tax rate is one of the highest in the state, and it was a very sore subject to put anything more on the tax rate. So the business model that we developed many decades ago was one where we created a special revenue fund where the income was coming in from people bringing trash to the facility to get rid of it, and then the sale of the recycling commodities and the revenue that generated, that totaled about $5 million a year. And on the other side of it, the outflow, the expenditures, was about $5 million associated with the personnel that at the facility, as well as the cost of disposing of trash once the Keene landfill closed in 1999. So in terms of framing the issue, in the United States, we have 4% of the world's population, yet we generate 12% of the world's trash. We are the undisputed champion of trash generation. Nobody even comes close to what we do in the United States. So we're number one. And it's big business. So, you know, back in the day when I used to travel to the Keene landfill to go to work, you know, if you were driving on Route 12, oftentimes you'd sort of run through an area that kind of smelled. And that was because the decomposing trash was venting out of the unlined landfill. And that was actually not methane, which is a colorless and odorless gas caused by decomposition, but it was actually hydrogen sulfide. And people would always tell me, gosh, it really smelled bad today. And I was like, that's the smell of money. Because in the United States, trash disposal is about a $200 billion business a year. It's why the mafia was interested in the business way back in the day. And ironically, you know, New York City was one of the most famous places where the mafia had a stranglehold on the waste business. And it was, ironically, it was Rudy Giuliani that basically broke up the mafia control of waste generation. Although I would argue that today, with some of the 800-pound gorillas that control it, we have a different kind of mafia, but we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Trash generation is a big business, but recycling is also a very big business. And right now, we have about just barely above a 20% recycling rate in the United States. And it's been that way for some time, and it generates about $112 billion of economic activity a year. So it's, if you think about the 80% that either goes to a landfill or incinerator, generating $200 billion of economic activity versus the $112 billion from 20% recycling, well, somehow we managed to increase recycling from our current 20 to 25% to, like, say, 75%. It would add about 1.7 million jobs on top of the 685,000 jobs that are already associated with recycling activities. So it's a really, really important domestic manufacturing opportunity that we have that will transform our economy in a way that a lot of people will benefit from, as well as the environment. The issue that we're concerned about in New Hampshire specifically is that there are two specific landfills in New Hampshire that are the cause of a lot of the discussion that's going on in waste right now. One of them is located in Bethlehem, New Hampshire. That's operated by Casella Waste. And some of you may be familiar with Casella Waste because Casella has made a huge play in this area to basically buy up some of the local haulers. They've made a presence in Keene. They bought up ABC Disposal. And more recently, they purchased Monadnock Disposal. So Casella is really becoming one of those 800-pound gorillas that's going to be a challenge to deal with in the future because their interests are not necessarily aligned with what I believe the community interest might be of increasing diversion and decreasing reliance on disposal. But the real issue that we're facing right now, and this has become a little bit of political football, is down in Rochester, New Hampshire. There's a landfill operated by Waste Management there called Turnkey Landfill. And that landfill is by far the largest landfill in the state of New Hampshire, and about half of the waste that comes to that landfill on an annual basis is coming from either Massachusetts or Rhode Island. So it's basically taking the capacity that we have for disposing of our waste in New Hampshire and decreasing the airspace that we will rely on in the future, and it's going to require construction of new landfills. If we don't do anything right now, we're going to run out of disposal capacity in around 2035 or so. But with what I'm going to be talking about tonight, we have the opportunity to potentially extend our existing landfill capacity by decades, if not more, but we need to do a few things before that happens. I titled this slide, The Drinking Game Infrastructure, because I always think about, sometimes when you're somewhere, like if you're watching a TV show and you all agree that when they say that word, we're going to take a shot. Well, my drinking game word is infrastructure, because I'm going to say the word infrastructure a lot, because to me, it's really the key of what I'm talking about tonight. And by way of example, infrastructure being the key to an actual meaningful change is that in 1956, the Eisenhower administration commissioned the building of the interstate highway system. I just got back from a road trip with my daughter from Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and we took a 4,000-mile road trip over the last 2 weeks and utilized much of that infrastructure that we enjoyed. But what's amazing about the 41,000 miles of roadways that was commissioned by the Eisenhower administration is that it decreased the travel time from point A to point B by 20%, which is an unbelievable game changer. I mean, just in terms of both commerce and leisure, it was a total game changer. And, and we all get to enjoy those benefits of that infrastructure investment. And it actually meaningfully changed the game for across the spectrum. But another example is that in July of 1969, I was a 6-year-old boy on Fifth Avenue in New York City, watching the crew of the Apollo 11 crew come back from their mission to the moon, Neil Armstrong and the gang. And what's amazing about that is that in July of 1969, if you happened to have gone to the airport to go travel somewhere, you would have been dragging your suitcase through the airport, because wheels on suitcases didn't appear until 1970. So I'm going to repeat that for just a second so that sinks in a little bit. We went to the freaking moon in July of 1969, and yet we were still dragging our suitcase through the airport because no wheels were available to us. And so I would argue that right now what we have is a solid waste program that has no wheels on its suitcase. And that's the problem. And this is an infrastructure problem, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Because we're not going to educate our way out of this problem. We're not going to sort our way out of this problem. This is not a solution that we can rely on small towns and their examples to follow, because it's just not practical or feasible for a number of reasons, which I'll explain. The title of this slide is Am I Sure? Because every single day, practically in my own home, somebody comes up to me with something in their hand and says, is this recyclable or not? And I will give my answer based on my 33 years of experience in this. And then inevitably, the question will come back to me, are you sure? Yes, I am sure, just as I'm sure that an infrastructure investment is a game changer by the fact that I've got 2 photos on here which are a little difficult to see, but I'll explain them. So on the right-hand side, there's a picture of me back in June of 1992 holding a sign that says, recycling saves you money. And behind me is the Keene Recycling Center, which was effectively a 2-car garage that served as the Keene Recycling Center. And we were doing probably 1% to 2% recycling at that particular juncture in 1992. In 1994, on the picture on the left, is the picture of what is now the Keene Recycling Center. It's also known as a Materials Recovery Facility, or a MRF, an MRF, a Materials Recovery Facility. And a Materials Recovery Facility differs from a normal recycling center in that a Materials Recovery Facility is a facility that has machines to help you do the sortation because of the volume of the material coming in there. Keene has a population of about 23,000 people. It doubles in population during the daytime, so we have trash generation that's more appropriating about 50,000 people a year. And there would be no practical way, if we were continuing to operate at that 2-car garage, that we would be able to maintain any kind of recycling processing. So we built this facility, and that was an investment in infrastructure. And that literally that very day that we opened that facility, we went from about 1% to 2% recycling to about 20% recycling, which was fantastic, right? I mean, that's pretty good. But that's back in 1994. Here I am sitting here in 2026, and our recycling rate is about 20-some-odd%. So, in some ways, I'm very, flattered and honored to be in the Recycling Hall of Fame, but I also feel like in some way I've failed because, we're just stuck. We're stuck because we don't have the proper infrastructure to properly deal with what we're talking about and the scale we need to talk about. So the really question is what do we need to make this quantum leap? So the question is what if the act of throwing something away was an actual act of recycling? And so I'm going to use the word recycling and the word diversion sort of a lot tonight. And they're sort of interchangeable terms, but diversion is something that's not going to a landfill or an incinerator, basically. There's a hierarchy of waste management. You've all heard it before, the reduce, reuse, recycle, et cetera. But there's also a lot of other techniques that you can use to divert waste, whether it's composting, anaerobic digestion, pyrolysis. There's other tools that you can use that are higher and better use. And everything that I'm looking at from this point of view is basically a mass balance equation. What is the inherent energy value of the thing that you're throwing away, and how do you preserve that energy value to the greatest extent? And that basically, is an engineering problem that you can use to help develop the processes and systems to better process our materials and better handle them in a more environmentally friendly way, but also an economically better way. So what I am in fact talking about is a one-bin system. Basically, if you have a banana peel, a plastic bottle, a glass bottle, a steel can, a piece of paper, it doesn't matter what you have, it's going to go into one bin. That one bin gets collected at your curbside, or you bring it to your local recycling center, and that material gets placed into a single container. That single container ends up getting transported to a facility that is set up to process this material the way it comes in. In Keene, we operate what is known as a dual-stream MRF. That means that we keep our containers, our bottles, our cans, our plastic containers separate from our fiber material. So we process that material, the commingled containers, so all those things are mixed together and then they're conveyed up a processing line, and then we sort these items based on what they are. And at the very end of the line, we have a negative sort system so that whatever's left on the line is either unrecyclable because it doesn't meet our specifications, or it's an incompatible material, it's something that we don't accept for recycling, or it's been broken into a small enough piece that we can't efficiently recycle it, so it goes off the end of the line. That represents about 10 to 15% of the input that's coming in. And then the fiber material is kept separate because we don't have a proper way of separating the fibers mixed together with the containers. There are a number of facilities called single-stream facilities that they mix the fiber materials together with the containers, but they're still sorting for the same basic things. It's not an improvement of the system. What I'm talking about is something a little bit different. So I've explained to you that we operate in Keene a materials recovery facility, a MRF. We do 9 sortations, typical of most recycling centers in the state. An AMRF, for lack of a better word, an advanced materials recovery facility, is a facility that would do up to 70 sortations of the waste stream, using machinery to help us with this process. We have the ability to collect material at the source, bring it to a centralized facility. The 70 sortations will be able to be up to 80% of that material that comes into that facility will be able to be processed for higher and better use, and only 20% will be left over that ends up in a landfill. It's actually literally flipping on its ear exactly what we're doing right now. 80% of what we're doing right now is going to a landfill, 20% gets recycled. We're flipping that on its ear. Now, these facilities are not small facilities. These are big and they're expensive, but there's some good news. These facilities are available to us today. The technology exists, and these facilities can handle about 1,500 to 2,000 tons per day. They operate out of a waste shed, so they need about a population of about 500,000 people to make the economics work. New Hampshire has a population that could support approximately 3 of these. I actually did a little back of the envelope math about this today. We have launched over 1,000 Tomahawk missiles in the Iran war. It's a war. And $2.5 million for each Tomahawk. So that adds up to about $2.5 billion. That's enough to build 5 of these advanced materials recovery facilities. So it's just, to me, we're really great at blowing things up, but we're not really great at solving these problems. But there are reasons for that, and I'll explain more about that later. But we're talking about going from diversion of 20% to a diversion of 80+%. We're talking about a facility that not only will sort these 70 different items into their homogeneous categories, but the private sector will fund these things. The municipal sector does not need to fund these. You don't need to go to the select board or the town council and say, we need to float a bond to build one of these things. Nope. The private sector will build these things all day, every day. The only thing that a municipality needs to do is they need to commit the waste stream to the facility. It's not a put or pay. So some of you may have been involved with communities that serve a municipal incinerator, or an incinerator that's run by a corporation, and they have put or pay contracts, which means that they're expecting a certain amount of delivery of material because they need to keep the fires burning. But if you fall below that, then you have to basically pay the differential so that they can be whole economically. An advanced materials recovery facility will take whatever is given to it and separate it out economically. And what's amazing about this is that the cost, the tipping fee, as it were, is equal to or lower than our existing practice right now. So we have private sector can fund this. It's not going to increase tax rate whatsoever. It has a performance that goes from 20% diversion to 80% diversion. And environmentally, well, we'll talk about the greenhouse effect in a little bit, but it has every metric that you'd want to measure something by, it's superior. It also provides, and it's a great economic driver, because co-located on site of these advanced materials recovery facilities will be the off-takers of these things. So you'll have mini mills located right on the same campus, so that instead of like when I have a bale of something that I need to get rid of in Keene, I might have to send it hundreds or maybe even 1,000 miles for it to be processed in a manufacturing facility. If that manufacturing facility was literally like across the parking lot, that would certainly save a lot of transportation costs. So these facilities, there are two of these currently in existence right now. One of them is in Granada, Spain. The other one's in Oslo, Norway. So there's a proof of concept on this. Now these are 10, 15-year-old facilities, and they're probably doing about 60% diversion. But with some engineering changes that are available to us, these facilities can be easily expected to perform at a 80+% rate at a cost that's equal to or lower than what we're doing right now, and provide some really, really good manufacturing type of jobs, both engineering, mechanics, quality control, et cetera, just superior in every single way. Well, how does this do this? Well, I mean, I'm sitting here talking to you with my display boards, but yet I'm talking about technology here. An advanced materials recovery facility would use tools like artificial intelligence, optical sorting, air classification, ferrous and non-ferrous metal sortation. Every technology that's available to us can identify these items a lot faster than a human can. So that's why these facilities can take 1,500 to 2,000 tons per day and run them down a processing line and immediately identify the item that they're looking for, pull them off the line, and keep these items separate. So then you have, basically a recycling center is nothing more than a factory that is supplying the raw material for manufacturers to make new materials, effectively. That's all that we're doing, and preserving the energy value and energy balance in the process. But I will emphasize that we don't have any of these in the United States right now. There are advanced discussions happening right now in the United States in several places. Right now there's advanced discussions about siting one of these facilities in Maryland, Louisiana, Tennessee, and Illinois, and also there's a burgeoning effort happening in New Hampshire. I'll tell you about the organization just a little bit about that, who's doing that, in case you're interested in looking into it or getting more involved in it. But we're on the cusp of something really big. The question is whether or not we can overcome the barriers right now to siting one of these, and effectively, what the barriers are. The corporations that control the waste stream. They're effectively vertically integrated companies. They control the collection of the material, they control the transportation of the material, and they control the end disposal of it. And these 800-pound gorillas love their business model because they're making a lot of money. But with awareness that there is an alternative, I'm hoping that this will eventually change. Now, this isn't going to happen overnight. Even if you were to put a shovel in the ground today, it'd be 3 years before one of these facilities was open. They're complex, and there's a lot of infrastructure that goes into building one of these facilities. But it's just a race to be second, basically. Once one of these facilities demonstrates the proof of concept that I'm 100% sure is available to us, we're going to locate these facilities everywhere because it just makes no sense to do otherwise, basically. That's an artist's rendering of what an AMRF might look like. That doesn't exist right now, but it gives you an idea of what it's like. It's an enclosed facility. It's negatively pressured, so there's no odors or anything escaping from it. But it's just basically just a giant processing line. Actually, they have two of them because you need to have two lines for the redundancy, because if one of the lines goes down for maintenance, the trash never stops. So you got to be able to do that. And that's where the landfill certainly has an advantage, because there's no need to shut down a landfill. You just keep dumping it in one place and running over it and then covering it over with dirt every day, and there you have it. But an AMRF, this would be a great thing for like a brownfield development, or some place that doesn't, particularly if you have a railhead spur to service these. Every time you use a rail car to deliver materials, you take 3 tractor trailers off the road. And this is probably the one disadvantage to an AMRF that I can think of, is that there would be a fair amount of truck traffic coming in, because if you're talking about 1,500 tons or 2,000 tons per day, every one of the trucks that's coming into that facility has about 26 tons on it. So it's just a math equation about how many trucks you're talking about on a given day. But I think that maybe the cost-benefit analysis in that sense may be worth it. I was a person who actually ran a landfill for a little while. From 1992 to 1999, I ran the Keene landfill. And it was an interesting experience, sort of being a person, who has an environmental penchant, but yet, I would go up to the landfill every day, and after everybody had gone home, and just to sort of, it was a great view of Mount Monadnock from my facility, and probably one of the best one in Cheshire County, honestly. But I would also go up there to sort of see, measure my progress, and so I would sometimes randomly open up the bags of trash that were up there. And almost without fail, I would open up the bags and there'd be some kind of recyclable, some sort of easily common recyclable that were in those bags. And it was difficult to stomach that. But, it's even more difficult thinking, 30 years down the road, and, I could go up, if we still operated a landfill, I could open up tons of bags and find common recyclables in them, because, if they don't make it to the recycling center, then they have a one-way ticket to the landfill, and it's kind of depressing. But to me, when I see landfills, and I was recently driving through Hartford, Connecticut, and on the left-hand side, just before you get to Hartford, there's a giant landfill there. And to me, yeah, I understand landfills are ubiquitous, but I just see them as monuments to failure. And I think that someday, 100 years from now, people are going to be like asking, what the hell were these people thinking about doing this? And someday, I think that it's very likely that landfills will ultimately be mined, because it's pretty well known what's in a landfill from a composition standpoint. So eventually there'll be resource mines that we can utilize, because 1/3 of what's in a landfill is the cover material that you use to cover up the trash every day, and the rest of it are materials that eventually will basically be fossilized, because there's no air and no water getting into them. Because when we cap a landfill, we basically prevent the natural decomposition process from happening any longer. It's one of the things that generates methane, and so by preventing air and water from getting into the landfill, it basically prevents the methane from generating, but it also prevents any decomposition from happening, so the landfill will basically stay intact, and you can dig up a landfill and read a newspaper from 50 years ago as if it were delivered yesterday. Pretty astounding. And it's the toxicity of trash that is a concern in a lot of ways. And the pictures that I have here, they're a little hard to see, but these pictures are from a fire that we had at the Keene transfer station about a year and a half ago. Now, what was interesting to me was that we hired a new solid waste manager in the City of Keene back last September, and his second day on the job, there was a fire caused by a lithium-ion battery that was improperly disposed. Now, we're going to start seeing an awful lot of articles in the papers about fires at transfer stations and fires in transfer trucks and fires in garbage trucks, because lithium batteries are everywhere. You can literally go to the Hallmark store and buy a greeting card that will sing you happy birthday, which is kind of cool. But then once the novelty wears off, you're probably going to chuck that into the waste bin. And if that battery casing gets compromised, that battery becomes explosive or flammable, and the resulting fires are very, very difficult to put out. We've had, during my tenure in Keene, we had 4 fires. Each one of them caused somewhere in the neighborhood of between $500,000 and $1 million worth of damage. Now, fortunately, nobody was injured in these, but it's a matter of time before that happens. And thank goodness the recycling center never caught on fire. It was just the transfer station. But this is happening all across the country right now with fires caused by lithium-ion batteries. But although one of them was caused during COVID, because when everybody had way too much time on their hands staying home, they decided to clean their basements and their garages out, and the incompatible materials that got mixed together would create these flammable situations, and that was another fire that we had to deal with. So there are consequences to our throwaway society. We also have, we've all heard about, we all have opinions about plastic, and I know that there's a lot of communities that are just really cracking down on plastic, and I don't think plastic is really going anywhere per se. But the problem with plastic in a way is that we have these microplastics that have entered into our world right now. And they're making their way into the food chain. And if microplastics weren't bad enough, I mean, inside of each one of our bodies right now is the equivalent of a plastic spoon's worth of plastic floating around inside your body right now. But if that wasn't a concern enough, there are nanoplastics now that they've identified that are managing to pierce the blood-brain barrier. So we're literally conducting an uncontrolled experiment on humanity with unknown consequences right now. And I would posit that some of the things that we're seeing a lot more of now, whether it's Alzheimer's or dementia, might have a basis in some of these plastics that are making their way into our brains and messing us up. I don't know that for a fact, but I would say that that's a reasonable proposition. What keeps me up at night is the contribution that waste has towards climate change. About 10 to 15% of the inputs to climate change are associated with waste activities. And I'm just going to give you a quick example of a graph that shows what the problem is. The bottom time scale is time in thousands of years. The left-hand side is temperature in Celsius degrees change. The 3 bottom lines are the 3 mass extinctions that have happened over time that are based on archaeological records. The line on the far left with the circle, that's the trajectory that we're on right now with regard to warming. Now, it doesn't matter to me whether you believe in climate change or not. The simple fact of the matter is that any climate scientist worth his weight will tell you that right now there are 2 paths that we're on. One is catastrophic and the other one's terrible. So the work that I'm doing right now is to try to keep us in the terrible range. And the Amos situation, the opportunity that it represents an opportunity to make a significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions instead of just landfilling our materials. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. So in 1974, I would have been a 4th grader, and I was at recess at the Reed Elementary School in Tiburon, California. And the bell rang to go back to class, and I started trudging back to class, and I noticed that outside of a classroom that was not my own, there was a line that had formed. And so I thought that looked way more interesting than where I was going, so I decided to stand in that line. And I get to the front of the line, and they said, "Thank you for coming in. What would you like to read for us today?" And I said, "I don't even know what this is for." So they said, fine, sit down and read these lines, and I read about 20 seconds worth of lines, and they said, okay, you can go back to class now. And I went back to class. I didn't tell my parents about it or nothing, because it was interesting, but not so interesting to tell them at dinner time that night. But this is what happened as a result of that.
Hi, my name is Duncan Watson, the voice of Charlie Brown. I was 12 years old when I voiced everyone's favorite blockhead. You may be thinking, good grief, that was 50 years ago and he's a grown-up now. But through the magic of technology, you can get a personal message from me in the classic voice of Charlie Brown on cameo.com.
So, I wish I could say there was some talent involved, but the reason I use this, because it's kind of a fun fact, and it's kind of a cool thing, and for the past 3 years I've been traveling around the country to go to Comic-Cons, which I didn't even know was a thing, but apparently it is a thing, and I've been very fortunate that the woman who played the voice of Lucy had me come and join her at my first Comic-Con 3 years ago, and I've been doing it ever since. And my next big one coming up is going to be down in Rhode Island. I actually got invited to the Rhode Island Comic-Con, which I'm excited about. But the reason I use this example, in addition to the fact that it's kind of a cool, fun fact, is that this is artificial intelligence recreating my 12-year-old voice. That's exactly what I sounded like at 12 years old. Now, I have mixed feelings about it, of course, because I don't. Somebody else could easily take control of that, right? And that's where the danger lies, the intellectual property, as it were. But it's just really more of an example of what technology can do. So if you can recreate my 12-year-old voice through AI, you can sure as heck sort a can or a bottle off a processing line. And this is where the technology is really, really going to be helpful to our future. So I think I'm just going to make sure I have time here. Yeah, I've got time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick reading from the book, just to give you a flavor of what it's like, because it's different than what I've talked about tonight. And then I'll open it up to your questions. So this is an excerpt from chapter 4. I've been known to be a person who, when I get a bee in my bonnet, can be somewhat insufferable. Such was the case when in graduate school, living near the seacoast of New Hampshire, I stumbled on an idea for a recycling experiment. How much recyclables do 2 people generate in a year? The apartment we rented was essentially a house that had been sliced down the middle. Our end featured this sad little sun porch that had a depressing light and would never be used for more than a passageway to get to the driveway where our cars were parked. With the signing of a 1-year lease, my experiment began. Since the town we lived in had no recycling center and the sunroom had no real purpose, I thought of it as the perfect repository of accumulated recyclables within a calendar year. I placed the first bottle of what would become hundreds that first afternoon after schlepping our belongings from the moving van into that house that warm day on the 1st of June, 1990. It felt important to me to walk my talk. I'd be starting graduate school in the fall, and by God, I was going to save the planet all by myself. And frankly, I was curious. These things I'd be setting aside because they were easily recyclable in a number of communities, including many surrounding communities, were what most people in my town would be throwing away. I think it was the statistic about the energy lost by not recycling an aluminum can that really got my attention. Someone somewhere did an energy analysis of the energy required to create a new aluminum can made from recycling aluminum versus producing that same aluminum can from mining virgin bauxite ore. At the time, the energy loss of throwing the aluminum can in the trash was equivalent to filling it 3/4 full of gasoline and pouring it onto the ground. Now, the good news is the majority of aluminum cans produced are recycled, and aluminum recycling has been around since the inception of the aluminum can, but there are also millions of aluminum cans thrown away every week. The Aluminum Association estimates over $1 billion of aluminum is thrown away every year, and the volume represents enough aluminum to rebuild the entire U.S. commercial air fleet every 3 months. It's a stupendous waste, and I cannot help but think of the millions of cans 3/4 full of gas being emptied on the ground. Over the ensuing weeks and months, the summer became increasingly laden with the standard fare of recyclables separated by type, including high-density polyethylene, HDPE, known by its symbol number 2 in the bottom of the container. This type of plastic is commonly associated with milk jugs. Shortly after I began my job at the Keene Recycling Center, a prominent dairy introduced an opaque plastic milk jug that was purported to block light, thereby preserving the nutritional value of milk for a longer period of time. Skeptical of what I believed to be a marketing ploy, I had one of my colleagues at the recycling center close me inside a refrigerator to prove what I suspected to be true. The light does, in fact, go out when the refrigerator door is closed. So what if the opaque bottle sent recycling markets into a tizzy? The marketers had done their job and opaque milk jugs are still produced. About halfway through the year, I was asked what I intended to do with what had become a small mountain. The truth was I didn't know. I mean, I knew I wanted to weigh the material, but I wasn't quite sure where I was going to get rid of it. One of my undergraduate fraternity brothers lived in a nearby town, and his job was selling golf equipment, and 2 days a week I helped him service his accounts in Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. As Memorial Day approached, marking a time to move to a new place, the summer was now full from floor to ceiling with recyclables, resources that deserved a second life. I just needed to find a place to recycle this collection. The answer came in the form of my golf-selling buddy. He had a van, and he lived in a town with curbside recycling. It took 3 trips with his van and my own car loaded to the gills to transport what turned out to be 970 pounds of recyclables. I know because I picked up each bag and each bin, stepped on the bathroom scale, weighed myself, then did the math to subtract my body weight from the reading on the scale while holding the bag or bin. The Thursday before Memorial Day weekend, my friend's garage was filled with my recyclable discards, ready to be placed at curbside for the scheduled Friday collection. I wasn't in school that Friday and arrived bright and early for work at my friend's house where his business was based, but before we began to move the golf balls around, we had to prepare them for delivery. We had to bring the 970 pounds of recycling out to the curb. Usually the recycling guy came at around 11 a.m. or so, and we had finished putting the material next to the neighbor's one bin by 8 a.m. We then set to work doing inventory in preparation for the end of the month. There'd be no driving to golf courses that day. We broke for lunch around 1 p.m. and noticed the recycling was still stacked out front. We started to wrap things up around 5 p.m. and the recycling sat exactly where it had been since 8 a.m. In the kitchen, cracking open a beer to officially kick off the holiday weekend, we heard the unmistakable sound of the recycling truck as it turned onto the street where we were. We expected to hear the truck stop, but instead we heard the truck accelerate, and we watched as the truck whizzed by the house. We swung our heads toward each other as we realized that the recycling guy was blowing us off, unwilling to stop and pick up our almost half ton of material. It was hard to blame him. It was hot. It was after 5 p.m. on a holiday weekend Friday, and he just wasn't getting paid enough for this grief. No one would ever know why the material didn't get picked up, except we knew. We raced outside into the street, gesturing wildly for the recycling guy to stop. Almost a block away, we caught him. He tried to pretend he didn't know what we wanted, but he knew we knew, and the negotiation began. A small amount of begging, the offer of assistance, and a frosty six-pack convinced him to back up and return to the house. 15 minutes and 100 apologies later, the recyclables were finally on their way to a new life, and my experiment was over. To the recycling guy, thanks for being a good sport. That was way above the call of duty. Recycling can make you crazy like that. As I mentioned before, the whole Voice of Charlie Brown thing was a lark. But I do, if you decide that you want to purchase a book tonight, I have copies of the book that I'm happy to autograph for you, and I have these 2 prints that I will personalize for you. Now, if you went to a Comic-Con, you would pay $40 for one of these things. So for $20, you can get a really great read that also, I will humble brag, won a New Hampshire Writers Project Award for Best Work of Nonfiction in 2025, and also won an award at the New England Book Festival for Best Nonfiction. So don't take my word for it, take the word of Melanie Cohn, who was the voice of Lucy. He says, in true Charlie Brown fashion, the tales of loyalty and determination are inspiring and educational. Damn good work, you blockhead. With regard to organizations that are doing the work that is important right now, some of you may be familiar with an organization that used to be called the Northeast Resource Recovery Association, has now changed its name to New Hampshire Recycles. That organization is a nonprofit cooperative marketing association. Most communities in New Hampshire use them to help market their materials. They would have been the natural home for advocating for an advanced materials recovery facility, but unfortunately, they just couldn't see the vision, or they just didn't have enough of an imagination to want to take it on. So another organization got formed. I'm part of this organization on the board of trustees. It's called the Collaborative Solid Waste Strategies. And I have some brochures down on the table if you're interested in looking in this organization, but we're looking to become the trusted voice for New Hampshire with regard to solid waste solutions. And we are actively advocating for the construction or the siting of one of these advanced materials recovery facilities to service New Hampshire. So with any luck, we'll have that happen for us. But I'm happy to entertain any questions with the time I have left, unless Tom has something for me that he wants. Nope. So any questions you have, feel free. Yes, sir.
What happens to the recycled material? Do you sell it as an item, like a plastic block that goes to a manufacturer to make something else, or the aluminum block? Is that where that goes?
Yeah, that's all we do, in fact, they're commodities. And so, commodities go up and down depending on market forces that, are mysterious, if anything. But basically, when we process anything, we're trying to separate it into its like component. So, I can't mix together these materials. If I have a block of plastic, it's either a block of number 1 plastic, which is PETE, polyethyl terephthalate, or HDP, high-density polyethylene. And there's 2 different types. There's natural and colored. And we separate them each by type, and they each have a separate market for them. But yeah, that's exactly what we do. We basically, make these materials. We take these loose materials, we process them, and then we bale them. And the baling is basically just squishing them together to make them more efficient to transport. Now, once I have a bale, I don't really have much. I need 24 more of them to make a tractor trail load worth, and then I have something to sell. And this is part of the big problem that we have in recycling in general. So I'll just give you a really quick example. Let's say that we wanted to all of a sudden start recycling low-density polyethylene, LDPE. In order to do that, we have these boxes called Gaylord boxes. They're 1 cubic yard. They're 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot boxes, and we use those to store the materials temporarily. I need 40 of those boxes to make a bale. And then once I have that 1 bale, I need 24 more of them to make a marketable load of that material. The problem is like something like low-density polyethylene is not generated in the quantities in Keene with 50,000 people feeding it, that it would take me years to make a marketable quantity of that material. Whereas in an advanced materials recovery facility, because of the volume they're bringing in, all of a sudden it makes the availability of something that's a more difficult commodity to recycle because of the volume of it. You get that collected volume in such a way that it would be only a couple of days necessary to accumulate the volume necessary to make a marketable quantity of that material. And that's where the advantage of an advanced materials recovery facility comes in. Yep. Yes, sir.
What do small towns do when they have to deal with the 800-pound gorilla?
I mean, the short term, I'm not going to give you a great answer because not much, honestly. You don't have a lot of opportunities. The simple fact is that there's a demand for recycling. In fact, I was mentioning to somebody earlier today that recycling is more popular than democracy. More people participate in recycling on a daily basis than vote, which is not necessarily a great thing, but it's true. So in the short term, not a lot, because the simple fact of the matter is you just don't have the volumes to make any meaningful difference in the market. That's why consolidating these materials in a centralized facility is going to be a better driver of a policy that is going to have a more effective change. So in the short term, helping us to advocate to cite one of these things so that we have an alternative to what we do right now, which is mostly landfilling. That's really going to be the only practical solution right now. But there is each time I make one of these presentations, I see people all the time going, "Oh, this makes sense to me," because it does make sense. This is a solution that is available to us and has all the advantages that I talked about before versus our current practice. And so if people really start demanding this or asking the question to your leaders, your local leaders, your state leaders, that's how this change is going to happen. Awareness. Yes.
A lot of our plastic, you do a takeout container or whatever, is labeled, I think, like a 5 or 6, and our transfer station doesn't recycle those. How come? We only take the 1s and 2s.
Yes, because the 1s and 2s are generated in such a volume that you can make that turnover happen in a reasonable amount of time. As I mentioned just a moment ago, it's very difficult for a community, even of Keene size, to expand into other types of plastics because it's just not generated in the same volume so that it makes it feasible to process and market that. I mean, the processing alone takes an amazing amount of space. I mean, if you were to take 40 of those Gaylord boxes alone that I need to accumulate before I have enough to make a bale, it would practically fill up this room here. And, recycling centers just generally don't have that space. Yes.
Now, I understand that at some point was asked that if we do put plastic into the ones and twos, it actually is more costly for the recycling center because it's sorting, etc. But it sounds like with everything so computerized, it doesn't matter.
Well, in a facility like ours in Keene, our materials recovery facility, we have people that are on our processing line looking for those items, and there is a challenge for us because a lot of number 5s look like number 1s, and vice versa. And, the good news is that, when you after you sort for a while, you start to really get to know the product and you can do it a lot faster. But this is where the advantage of the machinery comes in, because, what might take somebody to do this, picking up the material, looking at it to see where the number is in the chasing arrows, that machine can do it, faster than a blink of an eye. And so this is where the advantage of the machines comes in.
Is it worth it to try and get people to do more recycling than we're already doing?
Yes, but the focus probably should be on those items that are currently very easily and readily recyclable that are not making it to the recycling center. There's an awful lot of fiber product that is going into the transfer stations, into landfills, awful lot of cardboard that goes there, awful lot of 1 and 2 plastics, awful lot of aluminum cans and steel cans. These are very easily recyclable items, but they just don't make it there because people just don't bother.
Yeah, going along with that, what are your thoughts about pay as you throw as a way of increasing recycling?
Pay as you throw is one of those tools in the toolbox that actually has a meaningful change, because it sends an economic signal to the generator of trash. Now, I know that people don't necessarily, like the idea because they don't necessarily want to be told what to do, but this gives you the ultimate choice. If you choose not to recycle, then you're going to pay for that choice. And so pay as you throw, for those who don't know, it's also referred to as pay by the bag or unit-based pricing. And to me, it's a very fair system. Like if you and I live next door to each other and you decide to leave your lights on all day, every day, I'm fine with that. But you're going to pay a higher electrical cost for that. But if that same situation happens with trash generation, in most municipalities where it's built into the tax rate, there's no differentiating. In fact, most of the 800-pound gorilla waste companies have these giant 96-gallon tote bins that they roll out to the curb. It doesn't matter if that thing is half full or totally full, they're going to charge you the exact same amount for that. So there's no incentive to recycle. Whereas a pay by the bag system, you basically go out and have to pay $2 or $3 for that one bag, and whatever's not recyclable you put in that bag, and whatever's recyclable you keep out of that bag and you recycle it, and you only pay for what you're disposing of. It's a very fair system, and it has been demonstrated to meaningfully change a recycling rate. It decreases trash generation and increases recycling. It's a great tool, and why almost every community doesn't adopt it is really mystifying to me, honestly. Yes, sir.
Citing one of these conservation laws, is the state helping it, or needs the big picture? How is that process going to happen? Selecting the state?
Well, so there is there's an effort right now to educate legislators about these opportunities, and I'm not going to sit up here and tell you that certain key legislators are bought and paid for by the waste industry, but certain legislators in the state of New Hampshire are bought and paid for by the waste industry. I mean, there's no other explanation for it, because it doesn't. The people who are the ones who are blocking the progress on this issue are basically doing something against their own stated interests. I mean, from an economic standpoint, from an environmental standpoint, economics and environmentalism are not mutually exclusive concepts. They absolutely, good business is good environmental practice is good business. They belong together, and until that dawning realization really hits home, we're going to stay with status quo. But I do feel like there is some momentum changing happening with certain key people in the legislature that is going to make some meaningful changes in the future.
We can take one. Any more questions? One more? Take one more.
Yeah.
Could you comment on New Hampshire such a rural state? If we had access to one of these giant places, would our transportation costs not be? I mean, they would be huge, right? Because we have to be transporting everything to that place, which is in some city.
Right.
So, what is that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So as I mentioned before, one of these facilities would service what's known as a waste shed, 500,000 people. So the numbers that I talked about being equal to or less than our existing practice factors in a transportation distance of between 50 and 75 miles, which pretty much covers most of the areas. So the transportation costs, yes, they are a factor, but I'm traveling 99 miles one way to get rid of trash in Rochester right now. And, if I had one that was more centrally located, it would reduce transportation costs and, dramatically improve our diversion rate going from 20 to 80%. Yes, sir.
You indicated that man-made climate change is one of your biggest concerns. So why don't we, then you said burying it the way they do it now doesn't have any type of gases or anything like that, it's pretty inert. So why don't we bury everything at the moment for the next 20 years and then figure out what to do 20 years from now?
Well, so to your point, so that's a great point. So in the process of, until a landfill actually gets closed and covered up, then, it's still, the decomposition of the trash is emitting the greenhouse gases. But to your point, instead of burying it in a landfill as a staging thing, the better way to handle it while one of these facilities is being built is to actually bale all of this trash. Because when you bale it, you're basically cutting off its access to air and water, and then you basically wrap it in plastic, and then you store it. And so that would be a solution that is available to us if we choose to go with the AMRF route. While it's being built, instead of putting this stuff in a landfill, we basically bale this material up and basically store it in an inert way until it's ready to be processed. Yeah. Great question. I'm more than happy to answer more questions after. I know that they want to wrap up, right now, but I can stay as long as anybody has questions, and I'm available to personalize a book if you like.
And why don't you let's give Duncan a big hand. Because this is an answer that can work, and the problem's not going away. And so we love to hear about answers that really work. It's not just pie in the sky. It does work. And to show our appreciation, here's our New Hampshire's best.
I'm super excited about this. I just poured out the last of my maple syrup this morning in my tea, so I'm pretty happy.
And he's going to be next door. We have a wonderful reception set up by Helen and Steve. We're probably over there already right now.
We're running out of here.
Okay, so walk over to the mayor's house and we can answer more questions. And I'll close by saying next week, at Amos Fortune, we will welcome Marie Ivanovich, the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. She's a retired senior member of the United States Foreign Service and an author of Lessons from the Edge memoir. She's a wonderful speaker too. And so come back and see us next Friday. And thank you all for coming. And the bowls by the door, our good friend Susan. So, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That's yours.
That's mine. Yeah. That was an awesome talk.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Actually, these people understand the problem. These are the people.
Yeah, no kidding. I can tell.